The next person that I am bringing up to the stage is someone I've known now for almost 4 years. This woman is a powerhouse. Her name is Gina Hope. And I love that hope is in her name because she has been through so much. She has lived through so much. And she is an extraordinary human being. Thank you, Gina, for being here. You're on mute right now, just so you know. And Gina and I have now worked together for 4 years. She's one of my private clients, one of my executive coaching clients. And the extraordinary expansion that she's gone through in these past years has been amazing as she really navigates what future her looks like. How do we advocate for women in the workplace? How do we take this corporate world and reimagine it in this parallel pathway that it actually works for moms, for women, for our needs that we have, and how do we promote pipelines for how to get more women in her field into technology? So Gina, I'm so honored that you're here today. I'm gonna let you take it away, and I'm so excited for you guys to experience the brilliance that is Gina Hope.
Hello. Thank you guys. I'm excited to be here. I've worked with Suzanne for, almost 3 years now. And so when she asked me, it was an easy thing to say yes. As I prepared for this chat today, I actually imagined going a little bit different direction. I know the topic was advocacy. And for me, it was really tied around being a mom and how that's impacted me showing up at work and what I do around advocating for myself and for others. And then I met with Suzanne to prep for this, and everything went in a little bit different direction. She asked me a bunch of questions. What do I think the world should look like as a woman working? What does it look like for me? And what can I do, or what happens in my daily life where I try to kind of bridge that gap, make the world that I want, or make the world that I live in look like the world that I want. So I'm still here to discuss that topic of advocating. The topic itself hasn't changed, but her questions made me look at it a little bit differently. First, I'll start by just telling you a little bit about myself. I know she introduced me. I work at EA, it's a video game company. I head up engineering for a new product that we haven't announced. So yes, I chose a field that is predominantly male and a career that is predominantly male. So it's like a double negative, I guess. Lots of times I'm the only woman in the world, or only woman in the room. Prior to this, I worked at Activision, another video game company, for 10 years. And there I was definitely the only woman in the room. In 10 years on the engineering side, I was the most senior female, often sat at the table. It was just me and a bunch of guys. Not just a working woman, I am also a mother. I've got 3 kids. 2 I adopted just 2 years ago. And then there's my oldest son, who was born with special needs. And he passed away unexpectedly. It'll be 4 years ago next week. So lots of challenges. And if that wasn't enough, I've also had breast cancer twice. So life has dealt me a lot of crappy things. Still here, still working. So that's just a little bit about my background and give you some color into how because it definitely colors how I see the world and what I want from the world. When she asked me about the world that I wanted, I thought about being a mother, right? I want a world where, and I know not everybody on this is a mom, but we're almost all caretakers in some way. Women tend to be the primary caretaker. So whether it's for your parents, a friend, a husband, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a spouse, children. Women often play this role. We don't get a lot of credit for it. And it's hard. And it's hard when you have deadlines at work, you have things to deliver, you want to get ahead in what you're doing, but you also have to get people to doctor's appointments and arrange childcare and be the driver. And you've got someone sick at home that needs you, and all of those things. And just to manage that world with the world we have today is really hard. We don't place enough value on how much work that is. That in and of itself is a full-time job. We don't provide employees at most companies with lots of tools and support to make those things a little bit easier. If you've ever had to try to find childcare, it's a nightmare. When we were adopting, I wanted older children. So we adopted they're now 7 and 8. When they came to live with us, they were 4 and 6. And the childcare piece was a big deciding factor for us. It's the idea of going back to the beginning and trying to find childcare for kids, little kids. It was so expensive. It was inconsistent. It was just hard. So I was only willing to adopt kids that were already school age for that reason. And people shouldn't have to make that choice. Healthcare is another piece for me. It's not easy for a woman to be sick in the world that we live in. It makes it really, really hard. So when I think about this new world, there's access to healthcare, there's coverage for all things that women need related to healthcare. There is support for childcare, for parent care. There are resources to help you find and organize those things. There's flexibility in the hours that we work to get those things. There's support at work for when we need to step away and take care of those things in our personal life, that when we come back, we're not 10 steps behind our peers, right? That's the kind of world that I would want. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in. I've had various experiences, some good, some bad in the world that I live in. Some good. I've been fortunate when it comes to healthcare. I've worked at some companies that have some really great coverage, but I also know that that's not the case for lots of women. So I've been able to go through breast cancer treatment twice. It had very little financial impact, but this is the kind of thing that sends a lot of women into bankruptcy, or they choose just not to get the care. And that's just not okay. Childcare has been a challenge, as I alluded to. The world that I live in, it's really expensive. It's really hard to find. And it's not great quality. So that is a struggle. And then the world I live in, I said a little bit in my introduction of myself, I'm often the only woman in the room, and that's hard. It's hard to sit in a room around a table with 20 guys and be heard and be seen and be taken seriously. It gets hard to show up every day and have nobody in the room that looks like you. But that's the path that I have chosen. It's hard to not have advocates and allies and sponsorship when I needed it. It's been hard when I've struggled with a manager or a peer, not to be heard and taken seriously for what I'm saying, and to not look like I'm just a woman complaining, or I'm a woman going to a man to solve my problem, because that's not what I was doing. But that's how it was interpreted. And those things are really hard. And it gets hard some days to show up at work and participate and show up fully when you're facing those things. So the world that I want, I get to show up, I get to be seen, I get the support that I need. The world that I actually live in, that's not always the case. Suzanne asked me why I one of the things that she had asked was, why do I stick with it, right? Like, why would I keep working at these companies if that's what the world looks like, especially working in a video game company, which is predominantly bros. If you've seen any of it in the news, I think a big majority of them have gotten in trouble for how they treat women, how they promote women. So why do I stick with it? Like, why didn't I just go off and start my own thing? And when she asked me, my immediate response was, I needed the healthcare. I had a little boy with special needs. We had medical bills between occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, of over $50,000 a year. And that kind of limited some of my ability to take risk. But that's just part of it. I mean, the truth is, I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to go off and start my own thing to get the world that I want, to be able to show up and be supported in the way that I deserve. And I don't know that I always felt this way or always saw the world this way. But being a mom, particularly a mom of a special needs child, absolutely changed me. It changed the way that I looked at the world. I know that many of you out there are probably mothers, and would see and have experienced some of the same stuff. And so you're going to know what as I'm talking about this, there's probably a lot you can connect to. And I don't think that we always think about all of the things that we've learned outside of work that really make who we are, and really their strengths that men just don't have. And there are things that tools that we have to impact how we show up at work and how we can like advocate for ourselves and for others and make a difference. So when I think about like, how do I start to bridge that gap between the world that I want, the world that I live in, especially working in a predominantly male space, between software engineering and video games, one of the things I do is just show up. Every day I show up in a meeting, every day I walk in the door, I make a difference. And I know because they see someone that looks like me, whether they want to or not, I'm there in their face. So you can't ignore it. I also learned from raising my son Logan that this is where like those lessons really come into play. I really learned how much just having that exposure makes an impact. He had special needs, so we got immersed in the world of kids with lots of varying needs, and I'm a different person for it. The watching those kids and how hard they work and what they go through to accomplish just the simplest thing changed me. How can I not show up each day when my son would wake up every morning and be like, I'm going to be the best version of myself today. I am going to go off of that high dive. I'm going to like master swimming. He spent 8 years in swim lessons every week because we live in Southern California, so it's year round, learning to swim. It took 8 years, but he was determined to go off that high dive. He was determined to show up and try again and again and again. So that was a huge lesson for me, watching him and how he showed up, that, you know what, if I want the world to be different and if I want companies to be different, I need to show up. And just by showing up, I've already changed somebody's, and even if it's just one person, right? Then that person's going to act differently the next time around, or they're going to show up differently with their team or with the people that they meet with. So each time somebody like me sticks around, we crumble away at it just a little bit. But it's hard. Like I can say to show up and I can say to just go sit in that room and be the only woman, but it's hard and I'm lonely. So the other thing that I've really, really had to work at is being resilient. People like to, I hear a lot like, oh, you're so strong. I don't think I could ever gotten through the loss of a child and about like cancer and raising a special needs child and all of this. See, I don't really have a choice. I don't like the word strong because I don't feel that I'm extra special or extra strong. But I would say that I'm resilient, as most of us are. Um, and we need to be okay with that, that we are going to make lots of mistakes, that we are going to just learn from them and move on. And for me, resilience is really about, and I learned this from Logan again, is about the ability to get up every day and just strive to be the best version of yourselves, regardless of the circumstances. It's not about measuring ourselves against others. So I don't look in the room and say, that man has more than me, that person got a promotion ahead of me. It's not about measuring ourselves against those other people or viewing life as a competition to be won. For Logan, it was about the simple yet profound belief that everyone can win, even if we take a different path or a little longer to get there. So I show up. I'm resilient. I'm every day. I know I'm going to screw up and I'm going to make mistakes. I talk to Suzanne about it almost every week, about something that I wish I'd done differently, or I didn't have a reaction to, or I didn't maybe do my best. But I learn from that and I move on and I keep moving forward. Right? I keep showing up. I keep saying, like, every day, I'm just going to be the best version of myself that I can be that day. And another thing that I do as part of kind of bridging that gap, I also forgive myself for not being everything. I'm going to make a ton of mistakes. I'm going to screw up. I'm not going to say the right thing and do the right thing. And maybe that helps me, maybe that hurts me, but I'm human. But I think that each step along the way, as I continue to do that, it makes me stronger. It makes me a better advocate for myself and for others. Every time I screw up, I say a dumb thing, I say something stupid. It makes it so I'm also making it okay for the people that are coming behind me to make those mistakes and not feeling like I can only show up if I'm going to be perfect. I can only show up if I know I'm going to get it right and hit it 100%, because it's unrealistic. My daughter has this amazing teacher this year in school who focuses on a growth mindset. So in addition to math and lots of math and reading, every week they worked on a growth mindset, and it's changed her. She's a different person because of it. She focuses more on learning through failure. And her teacher starts the year with this quote. It's from Michael Jordan, and I thought it was amazing, where he says that I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. I've been trusted to make the game-winning shot, and I've missed, and I failed over and over in my life, and that's why I succeed. And that just like resonated with me and really sat with me. And I'm like, okay, here's somebody that people talk about being like the greatest of all time. And he admits to all of this failure to be that successful. So I want to bridge that gap. I want to show up. I want to change the world, but I'm going to screw up along the way. And that's okay. Because every time I screw up, as long as I'm willing to like learn from that, I'm going to do better the next time. And I'm going to make it a little bit better the next time. So that's another piece for me. Another piece in there is embracing uncertainty and taking risks. And this is something that I found is really hard for people. In my career, I've been involved in a lot of activity, whether it's an employee resource group, working on initiatives within companies around like recruiting and development, working with kind of leadership programs. and this is the one that really always surprises me. And maybe it's why I'm able to show up each day, even though it's just me and a bunch of guys, because it's a risk, right? And I've learned that people, often, and women especially, like there's this kind of this innate fear of failure and wanting to make sure I've got the sure path, that I know all the answers before I raise my hand. But you can't make change if you're waiting till you have all the information. If you're waiting till you know what the outcome is going to be. I recently worked with my daughter on, she did this living statue project where she was Rosa Parks. And we had to do a bunch of research on Rosa Parks, right? And she one day decided, you know what? And she wasn't the only one, but she decided, I'm not going to give up my seat on the bus, right? Like I deserve to have this seat, same as anybody else. And that was a risk. She didn't know what the outcome was going to be. She probably assumed I'm probably going to get arrested. But she didn't know that her single action was going to have that ripple effect that changed the country. So each time you are willing to take those risks, however small, I'm not saying be reckless, just like little small risks each day, it has an impact, and has an impact to make profound change. And so that's why I encourage everybody to continue to take those risks. And I know Suzanne talks a lot about these masculine and feminine energetics. And that feminine side that is more innately in most women, that's where we actually have a strength and a superpower to take those risks, to like bend the rules, create new paths. She talks to me a lot about if the role that I'm in isn't what I want, create the role that I want, make it look different. But that takes a little bit of risk. That takes a little bit of willing to step out of our comfort zone. And I do that. I have uncomfortable conversations. Some work, some don't. Some get me what I need, some get me what I want. But I'll tell you, like 100% of the time, the conversations that I don't have never get me what I want. And again, I learned a lot of this, and it's really easy to say, but if you think about it from being the perspective of a mother or a caretaker, you're probably doing this already, because you would never, ever let somebody, if your child wanted to be somewhere, your child wanted to participate, you needed something for your parents, your spouse is sick and needs care, you don't sit back and go, I'm not going to ask, I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to like until I figure out all the answers and how this could be solved. That's when I'm going to speak up. That never happens. What happens is you advocate, you speak up, you say the uncomfortable things, you get involved, you take those are little tiny risks every time you speak up, that you do it. For my son, he wasn't getting what he needed in school, had special needs. I didn't understand how a teacher could teach 12 kids, each with individual education goals, and each at a different place in math, right? How is my son going to learn everything he needed to learn when you had a teacher teaching 12 different things to 12 different kids? It just wasn't possible to me. And instead of just going, okay, that's how you do it, I spoke up. I said, explain this to me. Tell me how this is going to work. Tell me this is how this is going to get my son what he needs. And when it didn't, we escalated it. And I kept going and I kept going. When my son wanted to play soccer, I wanted him to play in his community. I wanted him to play here where we live, but there wasn't a program. The program was across town in another city. And when I asked about playing here where we live, the organization said, you should go to that other program. And I would never accept that for my son. My son has every right to play the same place where all of his peers play, same place where all of his friends play. Why would I accept anything less for my son? So I said no. So I pushed back. So I fought. I advocated for him. It was a risk. It could have flopped. They could have still said no. They said yes. Then it became, I actually had to create the program and run the program. Still could have flopped. It's now in its 8th year. We've had probably 150 kids come through the program, VIP soccer. But if I had waited till I had all the answers, till I knew how it was going to turn out, until I knew what needed to be, like I knew what, and I was unwilling to take those risks, I never would have gotten that soccer in place for him. So I take those lessons and those things that I've experienced to my work. It makes me speak up at work. It makes me say the uncomfortable things. What's the worst someone's going to say is no. I'm not saying be disrespectful, but don't be afraid to speak up and don't be afraid to say the hard thing. I think that, and then I'm going to come to one of the big ones in here. And I'm sure you've all heard it, the importance of networking, sponsorship, and allyship. And I heard all of those things all the time. And people would say, like, you need to build your network. You know, like, if you really want to get ahead, you really want to change the world, you need sponsors, right? Like, I'm not going to move up without sponsorship. I need an ally. The thing is, that's really easy to say, but it's really hard to do. And it's really hard to, I don't know, it was really hard for me just to like execute on. I'm naturally an introvert. So I'm not a person that likes to go out and network. Suzanne knows this. I'm not a person that likes to tout my accomplishments. So this was an area that was super hard for me. And like, I had heard those words, but it wasn't until I was a mom, you know, this ties back to motherhood for me, that I really understood what that meant. And it came with my son. When you have a kid with special needs, I didn't know this, 30% of kids are not diagnosed. So you never have a diagnosis. So there's not a clear roadmap. So I couldn't go, oh, my kid has Down syndrome. Here's what most kids with Down syndrome, like, this is like kind of their path. This is what their future looks like. We didn't have any of those, like cerebral palsy, none of those things. We did genetic testing, still didn't have an answer. So I just had to accept that we are never going to have the answer. And so with that, it's then, how do you help a person without a plan? How am I going to like get what I need for my son without a plan? And because there isn't a place that I could go and look and go, okay, services for Down syndrome, right? Like, you can't Google services for unknown special needs. Like, that just doesn't exist. So that's when I really, really had to rely on my network, the people around me, the people I met. And that involved me talking to lots of people, which is way out of my comfort zone. Because I needed to make sure my son was going to be the best version of himself he was capable of being, and I couldn't do it alone. So I spent lots of time. I joined groups. I now chair the special ed committee, advisory committee for our school district. I told you I started the special needs soccer. I started volunteering in the classrooms. I got into like a support group in the local area. And I built a network. I built a community. And through that, I learned about camps for my son, where he would be included. I learned about camps. I learned about places that services that he could go to. I learned about different ways we could include him in a way that I never would have been able to do on my own. I would have never thought of these things. Even just things as simple as what he gets in school, his services in school. So when you have a kid with special needs, they don't just go into a regular classroom. They have what's called an individual education plan, an IEP. And in there, you create a separate set of academic goals. You list out all of the supports that your child's going to get to be in that classroom. And it's hard to know what the school's proposing and whether or not that's right if you've never done it before. So this is where that network comes in. We would talk and be like, oh wait, you got that for your kid? I didn't know that was a thing. I'm going to go ask for that for my kid. And it was really about building that network. And even when Logan passed away, it was that network and those people that supported us and still support us today. And taking that perspective and that experience really taught me what I need to do differently in my work and how I show up at work. So it was about, in that moment, you know what, that network really helped my son. It helped my son be better, get more services, accomplish the things he wanted to accomplish. That swimming story I told you, I didn't know that swim program existed. It was because I was talking to another parent and they mentioned this program that works with kids with special needs. That's how I found that. I'd looked for swim lessons because I knew that's what he wanted to do. I would have never found it without him, without that network. My son would have never achieved that goal that was so important to him without that network. And so that really hit home for me. Like, I know I'm not going to hit my goals professionally if I don't build that network, however uncomfortable it is. And so it's made me reach out to women and men in the organization blindly. I hate doing it. I encourage every single person to do it. Even if it's just once a month, I'm going to reach out to somebody new to introduce yourself, to learn more about what they do. And now I've made that connection, because I do think it's also really important, and we maybe don't always do that, or at least I didn't do it, was reach out and make those connections when you don't need anything, right? Like, don't wait until you're at work and you're like, oh, I've got a question for Bob, so now I'm going to reach out to Bob, or I need help from Sally, so I'm going to reach out to Sally. I think Suzanne's telling me I should talk to people, and I'm having trouble seeing the comments. I've only seen a few of them. All right, just give me a sec if I can find all of these comments. I know they're in here. Oh, there we go. I got them up now. All right, I have them now. Sorry about that. Now I see all your comments. Thank you for everything you guys are saying. And it's not, I know I've talked a lot about in here, I see stuff about like being your own advocate, networking. But all of these things, because I know I talked about like advocating for others, all of these things have made it so if I'm able to advocate for others, right? I'm taking care of myself. I'm doing the things that I need to do to show up to be the best version of myself that allows me to show up for others, right? Like it's one of those things, if you've ever read some of those like parenting things, right? Moms tend to put everybody else first, but really to be the best mom or parent you can be, you also have to put yourself first. You have to take care of yourself. And some of it's just like I'm leading by example on how I show up at work so other women around me can see that. But also, I'm taking care of myself, so I'm in a good place that frees me to make sure I'm there for other people, to advocate for other people, to spend the time creating what I want or what I think we need at work. I know I've spoken about working in a video game company and being the only woman at the table in leadership. That was true at Activision. When I decided to move to EA, I actually, I said how Bridget is showing up and I don't want to go off and start my own thing. And I truly don't. Like, I want to work in the industry. I want to work in tech in big companies. It's what I enjoy. So I decided that I needed something in between. So when I moved to EA, I chose a company that 50% of their leadership is female. The number 2 person in the company is female. It's a different dynamic being here. So there are a lot more people that look like me. So it does make it a little bit easier, but there's still a lot of work to do in the journey, especially being in engineering. But coming in here and creating a team from scratch, I've been able to, my team is 40% women, which in engineering is unheard of because a lot of teams are about 10%. If you look at the pipeline coming out of school, it's also about 10% female. So it's really hard to build a team that looks like the world, but I'm trying. So because I'm in a really good place with myself, I'm able to spend time on the recruiting and the outreach that I need to build the kind of team that I want. I'm able to spend time with the women on my team and other women in the organization, helping them. So I participate in our mentorship program every time. So I'm a big believer in, again, you don't just walk the walk, you got to talk the talk. So I've worked on myself and now let me help share that with other people. So it's a way that I show up at work. I've had, I think, 3 people that I've mentored. Even though it's only supposed to be 6 months, I still talk to all of them. We've got a round of interns in this year. I don't have to, but I signed up to connect with the interns as well. Anything I can do to help women stay in the workforce, particularly stay in technology, I will absolutely do. I also have the opportunity in my role, and one of the things that I do is part of that pipeline. So being very choiceful about the organizations that we partner with. And I really, really try to pull, when we do internships and we're pulling in candidates, organizations that work with underserved populations. So it's not just women in tech, it's people of color as well. Because I want the world to look like it, I want my work to look like the world. And I know that if we want things to change, if I want to circle back to those kind of pillars about, like, I want childcare, I want a place where I can be a mom and not have to do it in secret. I want a place where I can take time off because I need to care for somebody, that work-life balance is okay. I need to show up in that way. So I do all of those things around, like, the resilience and showing up and embracing change and taking risks, but also that network and allyship and sponsorship, like those are the areas where I'm giving back, where I'm taking all of those things that I've experienced and learned and really like giving back to make space for other people and for other women and for people of color to really come up as well. And within my small team, I think that we've done a really good job. Like I said, 40% women. We have what I like to call work-life balance. So we always do these surveys. When I was at Activision, this was true. When I'm at EA, this is true. Video game companies are notorious for crunch time, for working lots of hours. But that has not been the case for my team because I value personally work-life balance. So I make sure that it is a value on our team, that it shows up for my team. And now think about this. I've had hundreds of people work for me over the years. This is how I show up at work. Some people I still work with, some people have gone on to other companies, and they're going to see that it doesn't have to be crunch time, that it's okay to take time to go and pick up your child from school. It's okay to not have all the answers in the classroom. It's okay to have a team that looks differently than me. And they're going to take those experiences to their new companies. And those companies might not look like the team that I created and might not look like the company that they worked for, but they know that it can. So it makes it a little bit easier for them to accept it or to ask for it or to be the change to create it. And I think that that's how we start to shift from the world that we live in today to the world that we want. Now I've done a lot of talking. I know there's people on here on the chat, which I can now see. Are there any questions? I know we've got about 15 minutes left. I can absolutely keep talking, but I also want to give an opportunity to answer any questions of stuff people are curious about or something I might not have talked about. Looking through the list, right? Not seeing any questions right now, which means I've just got to keep talking. Or Suzanne, do you have a question for me?
I do. First of all, I've just been loving watching the comments as you've been talking, because I think that your story, like there are so many points in your story where if we are like a bowling alley and we have 10 pins, you've had so many pins that have been hit down, and your resiliency it's beautiful, it's admirable, it's what we need more of in this world. And I'm just curious, I've known you for a while now, almost 3.5 years, I think. I can't quite keep it straight. What is the gist of that resiliency? Where does it come from?
And I talked a bit about Logan. It really comes from him. When you have a little boy who everything that we just typical people take for granted, he had to work for literally everything. So chewing, walking, talking, like I said, it took 8 years to swim. And that was because he needed to learn how to use his arms to alternate, right? It took 8 years for him to master that. And he never gave up. And every day he woke up with a smile and literally would say, I'm going to be the best kid I can be today. And so how do I have a choice to do anything but that? Here's a kid who, through no fault of his own, was born with a deck stacked against him and didn't let that stop him, right? He still went after everything he wanted out of life without fail. No matter how many times he got knocked down, he stood back up and he tried again. And that's been my experience spending time with kids with special needs in general. Like, they have so much resilience. And if they can do it, who am I to just curl up and just stop, right? The stuff that I'm facing, being the only woman in the room seems really, really small to having to like struggle just to walk or just to say the words, I love you. And that is the thing that like keeps me going every day. And then the fact that now he's not here and he can't, right? So, but I can, so I do it for him. So I do the things that he can't do.
What a beautiful answer. I remember the first time I met you at Activision, and it was September. And I did the typical thing that someone does when they're meeting a new person to see if you're going to work together. And I said, get into the elevator, and it's like, so how was your summer? And you said to me, do you remember what you said?
I probably said my son died.
Yeah, you're like, I should probably get this out of the way right away. My son died. And we had like 5 floors or whatever to go up the elevator. I can't even remember. And I'm thinking, okay, where do we start? And I was there to help you as an executive coach, to help you as a woman in a tech role, because my true belief is that if I can help women rise in organizations by learning how to play the current game, once they're in leadership positions, they can actually change the game. And you are the perfect shining example of that. Like, I could not be more proud of you as a human being and as a woman. Alana has a question. When you reach out, do you just introduce yourself, or is there something you say or offer?
That's a great question. I saw that. I try to find out something about the person, right, before I reach out. What are they interested in? What is their motivation? Even just what is their role? So for example, there is a woman in the organization here where I work where it was suggested that I reach out to her. And I could reach out and just be like, hey, I want to introduce myself. And that's okay. And sometimes that's all we have. And we can do that. But yeah, if you can connect it to something that they might be interested in, I think it's a little bit more powerful. I always try to think about too, when I'm meeting with somebody, particularly somebody kind of above me or maybe a bit more senior, what do I have to offer them? Right? Because I want to meet them because I want them to share with me, right? Like I want all of their insights and knowledge. But that isn't always fair. Just like you can't reach out and go, hey, I would love to hear you tell me everything about yourself and how you got moved up in your career and how you got all of these things. So I try to offer something. In this instance, this woman I happen to know is really interested in processes and like how we work as an organization and how to make things better. And I'm working on a project that's different from anything that EA has ever done. So we're working in a little bit different way. So for me to reach out in that instance, I'm going to be like, hey, like I want to introduce myself. I'd love to get some time. I'd love to share how we're working on this project. As you know, it's a little bit different from what we currently do at EA. And I think there might be some interesting things that we've tried that you might be interested in, right? She's going to share a ton back with me, but now I have something to give her. And so I always think about what I have to give that person, even if it's just one interesting thing, like what am I going to be able to share with them to make it worth their time as well? Because then it's going to, I think if you're able to do that, it'll go from just a one-time conversation where they just talk at you to an ongoing relationship where they're like, I want to spend more time with that person because they had something really insightful to say. So then it's going to make it easier to get that follow-up and build the relationship versus just a one-time talk.
I love that. And that's why I do tea and Zoom. For those of you here online know, I like to have these 20-minute sessions that are available on my calendar to just jump on and have tea and Zoom, because life is relationships. It really, at the end of the day, that's all it's about. And this kind of ties into a question I want to ask you, because I know moving from Activision to EA, what a life change it was for you, particularly because you got assigned some female mentors. And I would love for you to talk about what it was like prior to having female mentors and what it was like, what it's like now that you have female mentors. How's it different?
I will say Activision, they would go and scrounge up whatever female they could find, right, to try to give me a mentor. It was rarely a good fit because there were so few of us, right? You'd have someone so disconnected from the world that I lived in and the world I worked in, that it made it really challenging. I think the difference for me here at EA is not only are these women, but they're women with really important jobs, right? So I don't think it's enough just to have a female mentor. I think the role that they have in the organization also matters, right? It's not if your mentor is a woman who's a VP of HR, say, love HR, I think they're great, but it's already an area that is full of women, right? HR is primarily women. So they're not going to have the advice, at least for me being in engineering, the advice that I need, the experiences, the point of view, the perspectives. So for me, it's been really great having women. I talk regularly with our CTO. She's female. Another is an SVP of a product. And so these are women with real power who understand technology, who understand what I do in the world that I live in. So I've gotten some really great advice. Some just how to just navigate the company, but some also to, and this I didn't get when I was at Activision, that I do get here on, I guess, pushing back's the right word, but like speaking up, right? Standing up for myself. Because I also think, and I did this at Activision, I wanted to get promoted. I didn't want to be seen as difficult or demanding. I wanted to show up and just like be perfect. And I'm totally ready for that next level because look at how I do everything so perfectly and I never mess up. And I know I had a whole talk about like, it's okay to mess up and take risks and do all of those things because the way I was trying to get that promotion at Activision was untenable. I was miserable. I was unhappy. I constantly set myself up for failure. So showing up here and having these women go, it's a bunch of crap if you got that feedback, right? Like it's a bunch of crap. It's okay to make people uncomfortable. You can't be cruel, but you can make people uncomfortable. It's okay to be frustrated. You're a human. You're allowed to have those feelings. And then being able to give me real advice on how to navigate with inside of EA, like that has been game changing for me. Because I know Suzanne tells me these things, but then to also hear it from somebody inside the company, like, okay, that's really okay here, right? All that stuff and all that stuff I heard at Activision was just a lot of noise distracting me from how I really need to show up and how I really need to be happy with myself, to feel comfortable, to feel like I'm doing my best work, that I'm showing up in my best way.
I politely muted myself and then I started talking. I love what you're saying here because one of my jobs as an executive coach is not to just work with my client to help them achieve what they want to achieve, but it's also to work with the organization to make sure that the organization's desires for this person are matching with the desires of the person themselves. And there's times where like when Gina was at Activision and we were together there, I'm like, I don't think this is the right place for you anymore, because I would meet with her boss and realize that there was just no love there. Not because Gina's not lovable, because the organization was as it was. And so coming with her to EA and being part of a new paradigm is that I still get to talk to her boss, but like we're trying to set up something where I can meet with one of her mentors, because when I can bring information to Gina from the perspective of here's what an empowered woman looks like in a corporation, and then to get permission inside the corporation that it's okay culturally that we can say these things, because we're fighting with so much of the garbage that's in our heads about what's happened in the past. And you guys heard me talk earlier about the vestibule of now, which is empty. When it's clean and clear in the vestibule of now, we've gotten rid of the garbage from the past, right? And then there's space now to bring in what we desire from the future. More women in engineering. I was one of those women who fled engineering. I was 20 years in technology. And Gina and I have talked about this a lot because I can speak her language and the work that she's doing and the frustration she's having. And I'm like, what do you mean they didn't give you a functional document to help you understand how to build X, Y, or Z. But I think what's perhaps more important is like, I was a woman who was like, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not going to be called the dumbest person in the room anymore. But Gina has the fortitude and the resiliency to say, you know what? I want to be here. And now how can I find different levers that I can pull to make it easier for other women and other people? And I love what you said about how having Logan, living with Logan and losing Logan taught you how to live more freely, how to be more empowered. And I'm just wondering, you know, for the women here who are in jobs or the women who are, I know you know a lot of entrepreneurs as well. What advice would you have for them for when they're going through a hard time? How would you help them navigate something challenging? Is there something you say to yourself? Is there something that really helps you tune in to your heart center or the part of you that knows you're going to be okay no matter what?
Yeah, one, I would just say you got to let yourself feel it. Right? We tend to just want to push stuff aside, or I will deal with it later. If you don't deal with it, whether it's a problem at work, something going on in your personal life, something emotionally, life has a way of making you deal with it. Whether it's something that, if it's an emotional thing, if I ignore it, like it's likely eventually going to come out in some physical way. I'm going to get sick. If I don't deal with it at work, it's not suddenly magically going to go away. So I would say deal with it. I would also say, depending on what it is, some of the hard stuff, and like for me, I'm speaking about like the loss of Logan or some of those things that happen to us in life. I had read this thing and it kind of stuck with me. It's like if you've ever gone on a hike and you throw a backpack on, and that first time you hike, I don't know, maybe it's 20 pounds of stuff in your backpack. That backpack feels really heavy. Then each time you do it, and each time you go on that hike, it feels a little less heavy until eventually you don't feel the weight at all. The backpack didn't get any lighter, but you've learned to live with it. And so for me, that's a big piece of it. I don't miss Logan any less than I did 4 years ago. I've just I've let myself feel the pain, but I've also learned to live with it and just accept that some of this stuff is just a part of who we are. Like, we're not all just good. There's sadness and anger and frustration, and all of those parts exist inside of us. And some of those things all exist at the same time. But in terms of, if I'm tying this to like work and like the hard part, it has taught me, like, I do deal with it. And again, it doesn't go away, but each time I talk about it, or each time I have the conversation, it gets a little bit easier. It's the same thing. It gets a little bit easier until it doesn't feel so hard anymore, until it doesn't feel so insurmountable. So people get a little more comfortable with that conversation as well. So the first time's going to be really hard, but the 10th time, everybody's used to talking about it. So it gets a little bit easier.
Gina, I want to thank you so much for making time in your day to come share your wisdom, your story. I think so many people were moved by who you are and how you show up. I know I am. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really grateful. And I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Bye. Thank you. This was awesome. Thanks.